The words cut deeper than any blade when his mother shouted, "You're no son of mine if you choose that sin with Timothy." Tobias stood frozen in the living room of their suburban Ohio home, his world collapsing in an instant. His heart pounded as the reality sank in. The woman who had raised him, prayed with him every night, and taught him to fear God above all else was now turning her back on him because he loved another man. The Bible on the coffee table seemed to mock him with its leather cover worn from years of family devotion. "Mom, please, it's not a choice," he pleaded, voice cracking. But her face remained stone cold, eyes filled with a mixture of anger and what looked like fear. "Leave this house right now, Tobias. I won't have this abomination under my roof." With shaking hands, he grabbed a duffel bag from his room, throwing in clothes, his laptop, and the one photo of him and Timothy from their college days in Columbus. Timothy, his best friend turned love of his life, was waiting for his call. But how could he explain this? The bus ride to Chicago was a blur of tears and self-doubt. Was he really the sinner she claimed? The miles rolled by, taking him further from the only family he had known. When he finally stepped off at the Greyhound station downtown, Timothy was already there, his tall frame and kind brown eyes a beacon in the chaotic crowd. "Tobias, I'm so sorry," Timothy said, pulling him into a tight hug right there under the fluorescent lights. "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone." That first night in Timothy's cramped one-bedroom apartment on the north side, they sat on the worn couch until dawn. Tobias poured out every detail, the way his mother had found the letters, the way she had screamed scriptures at him, the way his father had stood silently in the hallway without a single word of defense. Timothy listened without interrupting, his hand resting steady on Tobias's knee. "My own parents took it hard at first, but they came around," Timothy offered quietly. "Yours might too someday." Tobias wanted to believe him, but the wound felt too fresh. He kept replaying the moment his mother had slammed the door, the sound echoing like a gunshot that ended his childhood in one brutal second. The next morning, Tobias forced himself out into the city. Chicago's skyline felt both terrifying and liberating. He landed a part-time barista job at a cafe near Wrigleyville, where the diverse crowd and constant chatter were nothing like the quiet Ohio streets he had grown up on. Customers smiled at him, asked about his day, and for the first time he didn't feel like he had to hide. Yet every time his phone buzzed with a call from his sister, who had already sided with their mother, the old guilt crashed back. "She's praying for you every night," his sister texted one afternoon. "She says you can still repent." Tobias deleted the message and focused on the espresso machine, but the words lingered like smoke. Timothy was patient, cooking simple dinners of pasta and salad after his own long shifts at the community center. They talked about everything except the future at first. Favorite movies, the college parties where they had first realized their feelings, the way Timothy had always made Tobias feel seen. One evening, after a particularly rough shift where a customer had muttered something ugly under his breath, Tobias broke down in the shower. Timothy waited outside the curtain, then wrapped him in a towel and held him until the shaking stopped. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he whispered. The words were simple, but they planted the first small seed of hope. As weeks turned into a month, Tobias started attending a weekly support group at a local LGBT center. There he met Marcus, an outgoing graphic designer who had been kicked out by his own family years earlier. "It sucks at first," Marcus admitted over cheap coffee after the meeting. "But you learn to build your own family." Tobias nodded, filing the advice away like a lifeline. He enrolled in night classes for graphic design at the community college, something he had dreamed of but never pursued under his parents' expectations of becoming a youth pastor. Each sketch he finished felt like a quiet rebellion. Yet the internal storm never fully calmed. Late at night, when Timothy was asleep, Tobias would stare at the ceiling and hear his mother's voice quoting Leviticus. The faith that had once been his comfort now felt like chains. He wondered if loving Timothy meant he was truly damned. Timothy sensed the distance and gently pushed. "We can talk to a counselor together if you want." Tobias agreed, but the first session left him raw and exhausted. Still, he kept going, because turning back meant facing the mother who no longer wanted him. By the end of that first Chicago winter, Tobias had a small paycheck, a growing portfolio, and a partner who refused to let him drown. The city lights outside their window seemed brighter than any church steeple he had ever known. He didn't know if he would ever speak to his mother again, but for the first time he was choosing to live, not just survive. The road ahead was long, filled with questions he couldn't yet answer, but at least he wasn't walking it alone. The first spring in Chicago brought warmer days and harder truths. Tobias's cafe job became full-time, and the regulars started recognizing him by name. One afternoon, an older woman with kind eyes left a generous tip and said, "You have a gentle spirit, young man." The compliment should have warmed him, but it only reminded him of the mother who used to say the same thing before everything shattered. He pocketed the cash and kept pouring lattes, pushing the memory down. Timothy's work at the youth center kept him busy too, mentoring teenagers who reminded Tobias of his younger self. Scared, confused, hiding who they were. Sometimes Timothy would come home with stories that hit too close. A kid whose parents had threatened to send him to conversion camp. "I tell them it gets better," Timothy said one night over takeout, "but I know how long better can take." Tobias reached across the table and squeezed his hand. In those moments, the love between them felt solid, like something worth every sacrifice. Workplace tension arrived without warning. A new manager named Derek started making comments, subtle at first, then louder. "You and your roommate seem real close," he smirked during a staff meeting. Tobias ignored it until the day Derek passed him over for a shift lead position. "We need someone the customers can relate to," Derek explained with a tight smile. The message was clear. Tobias came home furious, pacing the tiny living room while Timothy listened. "This is exactly what my mother warned me about," Tobias admitted, voice thick. "She said the world would punish me." Timothy pulled him onto the couch. "The world has people like Derek, but it also has people like us fighting back. You're stronger than his ignorance." Marcus from the support group became a true friend. They met for lunch once a week, sketching ideas for freelance gigs on napkins. Marcus shared his own story of betrayal, a best friend who had outed him to his conservative family. "I lost everything in one afternoon," Marcus said, "but I gained a life that's honest." Tobias felt the parallel too sharply. He started taking on small design jobs on the side, building a portfolio that might one day let him leave the cafe. Each completed project was a quiet victory against the voice in his head that still whispered he was broken. One weekend, Timothy suggested a road trip to a cabin up north. They drove along Lake Michigan, windows down, singing off-key to old songs. At the cabin, they sat by the fire, talking about the future they wanted, a bigger apartment, maybe adopting a dog, traveling someday. Tobias felt the first real peace he had known since the disowning. But the peace cracked when his sister called again. "Mom's been crying every night," she said. "She says she failed as a parent." Tobias hung up without answering, chest tight. Timothy held him through the tears that came later. "You didn't fail anyone," he murmured. "She made her choice. Now we make ours." Summer brought new challenges. Tobias's father suffered a mild heart attack back in Ohio. His sister begged him to come home. "Just for a visit. She won't even know you're there." Tobias refused, afraid the sight of his mother would undo all the progress he had made. Instead, he sent money through his sister and spent the night sketching furiously, channeling the helplessness into art. Timothy stayed up with him, offering quiet encouragement. Their relationship deepened in those quiet hours, not with grand gestures, but with the steady choice to stay. By late August, Tobias had landed his first real freelance contract with a local nonprofit. The paycheck was small, but the validation was huge. He celebrated with Timothy and Marcus at a rooftop bar, laughing under string lights while the city sparkled below. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his mother's rejection didn't define him. Yet every time he passed a church on his way to work, the old guilt flickered. He still hadn't told Timothy about the nightmares that still came, flames and judgment and his mother's disappointed face. Some wounds, he realized, healed slower than others. The season ended with a misunderstanding that nearly broke them. Timothy's boss offered him a promotion that required moving to Milwaukee for 6 months. Tobias panicked, convinced it was the beginning of the end. "You'll leave just like everyone else," he snapped one night. Timothy looked hurt but stayed calm. "I'm not leaving you. We can figure it out." They talked until sunrise, laying every fear on the table. In the end, Timothy turned down the promotion. "You're my home now," he said simply. The sacrifice meant more to Tobias than any words ever could. He understood then that love wasn't just feeling. It was choosing each other when it was hard. Fall arrived with crisp air and fresh starts. Tobias quit the cafe and went full-time freelance, working from their tiny kitchen table while Timothy handled community programs. Money was tighter, but the freedom felt worth it. Marcus introduced him to a network of queer artists, and soon Tobias was designing posters for Pride events and local theater productions. Each project chipped away at the shame he had carried from Ohio. He even started volunteering at the same youth center as Timothy, helping teens create digital art that expressed what words could not. Watching a 16-year-old boy light up after finishing his first piece reminded Tobias why he had fought so hard to stay. Yet family shadows lingered. His sister sent photos of their mother looking thinner, more withdrawn. "She won't talk about you, but she keeps your old baseball glove on the mantel," the text read. Tobias stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. Timothy noticed and suggested they visit a therapist together again. This time the sessions dug deeper, into the religious trauma that still made Tobias flinch at certain Bible verses. "Faith doesn't have to be a weapon," the counselor said gently. Tobias wanted to believe it, but belief had cost him everything once. A new conflict tested them when Marcus introduced Tobias to a gallery owner interested in his work. The opportunity required moving to New York for 3 months. Tobias saw it as the break he needed. Timothy worried about the distance. "We've barely had a year together since everything happened," Timothy pointed out during a tense dinner. "I'm not saying no, but I'm saying let's talk it through." The conversation stretched late into the night, uncovering old fears. Tobias afraid of being abandoned again, Timothy afraid of holding Tobias back. In the end, they compromised. Tobias would go, but they would visit each other every other weekend. The decision felt like growth, even if it hurt. In New York, the pace was relentless. Tobias crashed on a friend's couch in Brooklyn, worked long hours at the gallery, and met people from every background. One evening at a gallery opening, he overheard 2 men discussing their own family estrangements. Their stories mirrored his so closely that he stepped outside for air, calling Timothy immediately. "I miss you," he admitted, voice thick. "But I'm starting to see who I can become." Timothy's reply was steady. "I'm proud of you. Come home soon." Back in Chicago for the holidays, Tobias found Timothy had decorated their apartment with simple lights and a small tree. They exchanged gifts. Tobias gave Timothy a custom sketch of their first date. Timothy gave him a leather journal for his thoughts. Christmas Eve they attended a candlelight service at a welcoming church Marcus had recommended. For the first time in years, Tobias felt something close to peace inside those walls. The sermon spoke of love without conditions, and he let the words settle without the old panic. Yet the new year brought betrayal. A colleague at the gallery, someone Tobias had trusted, leaked his personal story to a conservative blog back in Ohio. The article twisted facts, painting him as the rebellious son who had broken his mother's heart. Comments flooded in, some from people he had grown up with. The pain was fresh, raw. Tobias shut down for days, barely eating. Timothy canceled his own plans and sat with him, reminding him that truth mattered more than lies. Slowly Tobias emerged, stronger. He wrote a calm response on his own social media, sharing only what he chose to share. The act of claiming his narrative felt like the biggest step yet. Marcus organized a small gathering to celebrate Tobias's first solo gallery show. Friends filled the space, laughing and toasting. Timothy stood beside him the whole night, hand on his lower back. In that moment, Tobias realized he had built something real, a chosen family that saw him completely. The road to New York had shown him possibilities. The return had shown him home. Spring in Chicago brought rain and unexpected clarity. Tobias's gallery work gained traction, and a local magazine featured him in an article about queer artists healing through creativity. The recognition felt validating, yet he still carried the quiet fear that one day his mother would see it and feel only shame. Timothy suggested they take a short trip back to Ohio, not to confront, just to drive past the old house. Tobias refused at first, then agreed after a sleepless night. They rented a car and made the 4-hour drive in silence. When they passed the familiar white house with the crooked mailbox, Tobias's chest tightened. His mother's car was in the driveway. For one wild second he considered knocking, but Timothy squeezed his hand and kept driving. "You don't owe her access until you're ready," he said softly. The simple truth settled something inside Tobias. On the drive back they talked about the future they wanted, marriage, perhaps, when the time felt right. The conversation felt like a promise. Back home, a new crisis hit. Timothy's mother was diagnosed with early-stage cancer. The news shook them both. Tobias watched Timothy wrestle with fear and love, flying home to Wisconsin every weekend to help. Tobias stepped up, handling bills and meals, learning that support sometimes meant silence and steady presence. When Timothy returned exhausted, Tobias held him without questions. The experience deepened their bond in ways neither had expected. During one of those long nights, Tobias finally voiced the question that had haunted him. "Do you ever worry I'll always carry this baggage?" Timothy's answer was immediate. "I worry about you carrying it alone. But we're in this together." The honesty broke something open. Tobias started journaling more seriously, filling pages with memories, anger, and slowly, forgiveness. Not for his mother yet, but for the boy he had been. Marcus faced his own turning point when his estranged father reached out after years of silence. The reunion was messy, full of tears and accusations. Watching Marcus navigate it gave Tobias a window into what his own future might hold. He began to imagine a conversation with his mother, not expecting miracles, but needing closure. The thought terrified and excited him at once. Summer brought heat and a breakthrough project. Tobias was commissioned to design a mural for the youth center. He poured every emotion into the piece. Broken chains turning into wings, faces emerging from shadows. When it was unveiled, the teens cheered. Timothy stood in the back, eyes shining with pride. That night they walked along the lake, talking about adopting a child someday. The conversation felt natural, hopeful, yet the past refused to stay quiet. A letter arrived from his sister. Their mother had been hospitalized briefly with stress-related issues. "She keeps your name in her prayers," the note said. Tobias read it twice, then tucked it away. He didn't reply, but the words lodged in his chest like a stone. Timothy noticed the change and suggested they see the counselor again. The sessions helped him name the feeling, grief mixed with lingering love. By late summer, Tobias had completed the mural and felt a new sense of purpose. He proposed a small commitment ceremony to Timothy, nothing legal yet, just a gathering of close friends to declare their love. Timothy said yes with tears in his eyes. Planning the simple event became a joyful distraction from the unanswered questions about Ohio. For the first time, Tobias allowed himself to believe he could have both, a life of love and eventual peace with his past. The small ceremony took place in Marcus's backyard under string lights. 20 friends gathered as Tobias and Timothy exchanged simple vows they had written themselves. "I choose you every day," Tobias said, voice steady. Timothy's reply was soft but sure. "And I choose you right back." The night ended with laughter and dancing, and for those hours the rest of the world disappeared. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Tobias's freelance business grew enough that they moved to a larger apartment with a view of the lake. Timothy's mother's treatment was going well, and the family visits became less heavy. Yet Tobias still checked his phone for messages from Ohio that never came. The silence hurt more than anger ever had. One crisp October afternoon, a private investigator contacted him. Your mother hired me to find you, the man said. Tobias's stomach dropped. He listened as the investigator explained that Evelyn, his mother, had been searching for months, driven by regret after a church friend lost her own son to suicide. She wants to meet, the investigator added. Tobias hung up without answering and sat on the floor for a long time. Timothy found him there and listened without judgment. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Tobias spent weeks wrestling with the decision. He visited the mural at the youth center, tracing the painted wings with his fingers. The image reminded him how far he had come. He finally agreed to a neutral meeting in a Chicago coffee shop. No pressure, just conversation. The date was set for December. Meanwhile, his work took him to a conference in New York where he spoke on a panel about art and healing. Standing on stage, sharing his journey without shame, felt like the ultimate reclamation. Timothy flew in for the event, and afterward they walked through Central Park holding hands. The city lights reflected in Timothy's eyes, and Tobias realized he was no longer running from his past. He was building something stronger. Back home, the holidays approached with mixed emotions. Tobias decorated their apartment with care, adding a small nativity scene not out of obligation but out of quiet respect for the parts of faith that still brought him comfort. He and Timothy hosted Marcus and a few friends for Thanksgiving, creating new traditions that felt like home. The night before the meeting with his mother, Tobias couldn't sleep. Timothy stayed awake with him, talking through every possible outcome. Even if it doesn't go well, you've already won, he said. You built a life worth living. The words anchored him. When morning came, Tobias dressed carefully and kissed Timothy goodbye. I love you, he said. No matter what happens today. The coffee shop was quiet when he arrived. His mother sat by the window, older and smaller than he remembered. When their eyes met, hers filled instantly with tears. Evelyn's hands trembled around her coffee cup as she looked at the son she had once cast away. Tobias, she whispered, voice breaking. I don't know where to start. He sat across from her, heart hammering, but the years of growth kept him steady. Start with why you're here, he said quietly. She spoke haltingly at first. The guilt that had crept in after his father's second heart scare, the church friend whose son had taken his own life, the nights she had woken crying because the house felt too empty. I thought I was protecting you from sin, she admitted, tears streaming. But I was the one who sinned against love. Tobias listened, feeling every word like a wave against old wounds. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he told her his story, the pain, the rebuilding, the love he had found with Timothy. He showed her a photo on his phone of the two of them at their commitment ceremony. Her eyes softened at the happiness in his face. I don't expect you to forgive me today, she said. But I want to try if you'll let me. Tobias felt the old chains loosen further. He didn't offer blanket forgiveness yet. Instead, he offered honesty. I need time, but I'm willing to talk again. They parted with an awkward hug that lasted longer than either expected. That evening, Tobias recounted everything to Timothy over dinner. Timothy listened, then pulled him close. You were brave today. The simple praise meant everything. Over the following months, Evelyn visited Chicago several times. Conversations were careful, sometimes painful, but progress came in small steps. A shared meal, a cautious laugh, an acknowledgement that love didn't require agreement on scripture. Timothy met her once, polite and kind, and she thanked him for standing by her son. Tobias continued his work, now mentoring more young artists and speaking at events about identity and faith. His relationship with Timothy grew deeper still. They began the process of legal marriage and talked seriously about fostering. The life they had built felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible on that rainy Ohio porch years earlier. One warm spring afternoon, Tobias stood on their balcony watching the city sparkle. His mother had sent a card that simply said, I'm proud of the man you've become. He smiled, tucking it away. The journey had been long, filled with every emotion imaginable. Betrayal, sacrifice, misunderstanding, and finally awakening. But standing beside Timothy, hand in hand, he knew the most important truth. Love, when chosen daily, could outlast even the deepest wounds. True or false? A mother's religious convictions should never justify abandoning her child?